81-year-old mother, Sabrina Peckham.
Investigators say her body was found inside a house on Wall Street.
They say a mother found the body of a woman wrapped in plastic inside her son's room.
Hello everyone, Michael here, and I will be your guide today as we investigate another gruesome case. One that took up some of my time before I released it, because it affected me personally. I have seen a similar situation up close, so I recognize this crime so much. For the most part, addiction is not fatal. Many people who have conquered their alcoholism, for instance, go on to lead fulfilling lives, start families, and even aid others who are going through the same tough times. Here started the tale of Nicole PItz, a young woman with what appeared to be an endless supply of promise in her future. It took 6 years of inquiry into this complex case before the primary murder suspect was brought to trial, and another year to establish his guilt and sentence him to the maximum allowable prison term. The perpetrator of this crime seemed to have given careful consideration to every aspect of it, and he seemed to have enjoyed life to the fullest for a long time, under the false impression that he would never face justice. The inquiry had been gathering bits and pieces of information for years, but it was the small details that helped put the pieces together. Now, starting at the very beginning, let's attempt to decipher this complicated tale. Nicole PItz. Who is she? On February 26, 1973, Nicole PItz came into this world in King County, Washington. Their marriage ended while she was a student, and her parents were left with just one child. Nicole was known as a natural charmer, a sports star, and an outgoing student in high school. There was no shortage of pals for her. Every summer during her vacation, she would take a journey to Lake Sammamish, which is east of Seattle, as her favorite spot to relax and unwind from city life. The young woman attended Western Washington University to major in public relations after finishing high school. Concurrently, Nicole maintained her high level of physical fitness by regular athletic participation, and she made the decision to make money from her passion. After landing a position as a trainer at a nearby sports club, Nicole not only earned the admiration of her peers, but also the devotion of her regular customers, who eagerly signed up for her group exercise courses. Concurrently, PItz opted to further her studies in the realm of management. Following her employment at a major mobile communications firm, she exuded an air of effortless friendliness, sociability, and readiness to provide a hand whenever needed. Behind an outward appearance of health, there was an immense amount of suffering, although nearly no one suspected it: substance abuse. The separation of Nicole's parents was a life-altering event for her when she was a teenager. It came as quite a jolt to a delicate, still-developing mind. Nicole, who was known for her defiant personality and association with negative people, started drinking as a means of escaping her issues. Because of all of this, Nicole developed a severe addiction that severely damaged her physical and mental health over the course of several years. In those days, Nicole's mom, Gail, was a stewardess and was so busy with her job that she was rarely home. That is why her lone daughter went undiagnosed for a long period. Alcoholism is a common occurrence in the girl's life, but her old grandma, who she lived with, was also unaware. Addiction to alcohol had already caused permanent harm when the truth came out. Nicole was supported in dealing with the matter by her mother, Gail, with whom she had maintained a strong bond through thick and thin. She did more than just send her daughter to treatment. She also joined her at Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, which helped her open up and conquer her alcoholism. At that point, Gail had already remarried, and Rod, her new lover, had been understanding. He did everything he could to help her stepdaughter, loved her deeply, and had faith in her ability to beat her addiction. Thanks to her responsible approach to treatment, which included never missing a session, Nicole was able to beat her addiction in no time. Having said that, Nicole's health was negatively affected by alcohol. She needed pancreatic surgery. because her condition worsened to a critical level. Worst of all, PItz was unable to have children since her early alcoholism interfered with her body's reproductive processes. David was Nicole's future husband. They met in the mid-1990s when Nicole was just beginning her sober life after overcoming her addiction. David was a frequent customer at the sports club where she had recently taken a job. Nicole was instantly smitten with a towering, good-looking young man who meticulously monitored his training and never missed a session. The handsome coach caught his eye, and he started to reciprocate by becoming interested in her. Even though Nicole was 4 years Nicole's junior, the two of them made a point of not letting their age gap show. They quickly began dating, and the romance continued for nearly 8 years before they finally tied the knot in 2002. In Hawaii, they planned a lovely wedding ceremony, inviting only their closest friends and family. Following their nuptials, the happy couple purchased a home in the peaceful Washington state town of Linwood and began to slowly establish themselves. Nicole was an outgoing and welcoming young lady. Her friendships spread rapidly, and she became well-liked by her neighbors as well. She loved pets and had a large family. Her inability to procreate led her to lavish her dogs with all the mother affection she could muster. The neighbors all agreed. David and Nicole were the picture-perfect newlyweds. When they went on walks with their dogs, they were practically inseparable. Their joy was contagious. Nicole adored the kitchen and had a natural talent for cooking. She enjoyed surprising visitors with her culinary prowess and spoiling her spouse with her mouth-watering, home-cooked meals. Nicole vanished without a trace in 2006, a few days prior to her 33rd birthday. She was the group's leader and inspiration, but she skipped the AA Society meeting that day for the first time ever. After nearly 9 years of sobriety, the other members of the group assumed she had cracked because this had never happened before. The fact that PItz was absent from work that day further added to the anxiety of her colleagues. At night, Gail sounded the alarm since, for the first time ever, she had been unable to reach her daughter throughout the day. She tried to get in touch with David to find out what had transpired, but her son-in-law said that he, too, was unable to reach his wife. Her husband claims that the two of them had an argument the day before, so he presumed that Nicole was still furious with him when he attempted to contact her the next day, but she did not answer. This is why David postponed, asking his wife for forgiveness until later in the day and didn't go searching for her immediately. As the evening wore on and Nicole's phone remained unanswered, the family made the decision to contact the authorities. However, they did not immediately receive approval for their proposal. The police stated that there was no reason to be concerned because the missing person was an adult and her absence had occurred within the past 24 hours. The search did not begin until the dusk of the second day because of this. The police chose to begin their search at Nicole and David's residence since she never showed up and her phone was out of service. However, there were no peculiarities or signs that could suggest that PItz had been abducted or that anything had happened to her in that specific room. Not only that, but Pitz's personal vehicle was also gone, leading many to believe that she had just gone and never came back. This is where the original storyline originated. In it, the young woman decides to leave her husband or scare him into submission, following a family argument. In the other version, Nicole's alcohol addiction support group, pals provided the voices. Nicole, in their view, could have lost it after all those years of sobriety. Her recent use of powerful painkillers, prescribed for her back injury and associated pain, lent credence to this theory. Nicole may have begun to abuse alcohol in addition to frequently exceeding her prescription amount. The worst-case scenario was the third alternative, in which Nicole did not return and provided no updates regarding her status after she had passed away. On the other hand, the missing person's loved ones clung to hope and refused to believe the news until now. Her mom and stepdad started looking for her before the cops even had a chance to wait the required amount of time. In a social media appeal, they asked for everyone's assistance in finding their daughter and asked that anyone with information about her whereabouts share it. They boarded the first available flight to Linwood, where they independently set out to find their daughter by posting flyers featuring her likeness and contacting anyone who might have knowledge of her whereabouts. In their pursuit of Nicole and information about her whereabouts on that tragic day, the police also looked for her vehicle. The longer they continued looking, the less likely it became that they would locate Nicole alive. A man who was out for a morning jog in one of the nearby park areas found the lifeless body of a young woman a few days later, confirming all of the worst suspicions. Instead of taking his normal route, he chose to go through a less popular and ignored part of town that day. As he approached the weird object in the thicket, he saw that it was the nude corpse of a severely injured woman. The news of the horrific discovery quickly spread to the authorities, and the first criminalists to arrive at the site speculated that the young woman's lack of clothing indicated that violence may have been a factor in the crime. The victim had clearly been brutally beaten. Prior to the murder, as evidenced by the numerous bruises, abrasions, and bruises. Nicole died of asphyxiation when she strangled herself with her bare hands. The image was horrifying. Since the victim's vehicle has yet to be located, while thievery was initially thought to be the primary motivation by investigators, the assailant ultimately decided to eliminate a witness, a young woman who may have also been a victim of abuse, in order to bolster their case. The body was quickly identified as belonging to Nicole PItz, who had vanished a few days prior and was being sought for around the city, according to the police. Her family had not yet identified her, though. Tragically, Gail went completely insane upon seeing her daughter's lifeless body in the morgue. The mom required medical attention. Her husband Rod was also grieving, but his wife's unusual behavior stood out. David appeared quite upbeat, and his expressions were slightly artificial. But nobody really cared about it at the time because everyone deals with tragedy differently. Even as they continued their search, authorities had the belief that the car was the assailant's primary goal and that any evidence of the killer should be found there. A public appeal was made through various media outlets for the public to promptly notify the hotline in the event that they saw the missing vehicle. 2 or 3 weeks after that, the vehicle was located in a parking lot on the outskirts of town. Since the mundane gray Volkswagen Polo had been left behind for quite some time, the on-duty guard couldn't help but notice it. It was involved in a murder case, but the guard was unaware of it. The police wasted no time in seizing the vehicle and taking it in for a thorough inspection. It was thought that this was the place where they could discover crucial clues that would lead them to the perpetrator and assist piece together the crime scene. Nevertheless, the detectives were utterly let down. Nothing was located in the vehicle, not a single thing. No signs of violence, blood, or coercion were found on the vehicle's owner. The only fingerprints and DNA evidence found in the cabin belonged to Nicole and her husband, who drove the car on occasion. The detectives were patient in returning the vehicle to David, though since they were certain that the proof was there, it simply wasn't immediately apparent. The sole, indisputable truth was the particularly brutal manner of the young woman's murder, yet the killer's motivation remained a mystery. The idea that the car was hijacked appeared implausible, given since it had been abandoned on the opposite side of the city so quickly, and there had been no indications of fighting inside. As for the second apparent reason, it was assumed to be violence, although this was not proven. The victim had no sexual encounters, either voluntarily or coerced, at least one day before to the incident, according to the experts. The mystery of why she was naked persisted nevertheless in this instance. Thirdly, the offender may have had strong negative emotions or ulterior motives towards the victim. The many wounds inflicted as if in a rage were voiced in support of this theory. But Nicole, who was friendly and outgoing and always willing to lend a hand, had no haters or jealous people in her life. Since the inquiry had not yielded any fresh leads or directions for the pursuit of the perpetrator after nearly a year, it was highly probable that this challenging case would stay unresolved. Due to the lack of foot traffic and nearby security cameras, no one was able to decipher the code or identify the person who left the vehicle in the parking lot. What made the situation even more peculiar was the fact that, according to the positioning of the driver's seat, the individual behind the wheel was noticeably taller and heavier than the victim. This case's designation as secret raises suspicions because no one, not even the victim's family, has been informed of the investigation's progress, new facts, or evidence. That is to say, the spouse, stepfather, and mother were not informed. For instance, they learned that a particular petrol station in the nation charged Nicole's card after she vanished. But other than that, they had only partial information. The cops wanted to see what was captured on camera, but they didn't know what they were looking at. Disappointed that the police had turned up no leads and that Nicole's murderer remained at large, Nicole's parents resolved to launch their own inquiry. They enlisted the help of a private investigator to help them with this task by collecting relevant data and checking their assumptions. A $10,000 reward has been promised for anyone who can supply any relevant information regarding the matter. Even with a further raise to $35,000, the prize failed. To aid in the progress of the investigation, following the initial 6 months of involvement in the investigation, David progressively distanced himself, severed ties with his in-laws' families, and remarried. This was devastating news for Gail, because her daughter was sterile, and they were often picking on his wife about it. It appears that the police did not give any thought to the possibility that the son-in-law was the perpetrator, despite the fact that the distraught mother's repeated suggestions that he could be the one were met with opposition. 6 years after the crime, it was announced that David had been hauled into custody as the primary suspect in the case. This was an unexpected turn of events in the investigation. The majority of those who followed the investigation were taken aback by such a revelation. However, Nicole's family and friends were not taken aback by this turn of events because they had suspected him from the very beginning and had discussed it publicly. During the many years that the investigation lasted, they appeared to be dissatisfied with the legal system, yet justice had finally been carried out. When the handcuffs were snapped on David's wrists, he was disheartened because he believed that the investigation had been resolved for a long time and that no one was hunting for the criminal. At that time, David had relocated to a new location and had severed all communication with the family of his first wife. He adamantly denied any wrongdoing and even volunteered to take a lie detector test, which he proceeded to fail with a resounding failure. From the very beginning, the police had a suspicion that David was involved in the crime. However, they did not possess any concrete proof that might prove his guilt. In addition, they did not want to in order to frighten the culprit and force him to conceal. For all of these years, the investigators were preoccupied with the fact that they needed to gather various pieces of evidence in order to ensure that the perpetrator received the punishment that they deserved. David most likely believed that he had done the ideal crime and that no one would ever be able to track him down. The crime, on the other hand, contained a variety of peculiarities, each of which needed to be investigated. It would be a good idea to begin with the CCTV tape from the same gas station where someone paid with the credit card belonging to Nicole, who has now passed away. The video footage made it abundantly evident that the card was used by a man who had a striking resemblance to David. However, due to the fact that he was wearing a headpiece and dark glasses, it was not able to positively identify him. This audio was nonetheless included in the case file. despite the fact that it could not be regarded evidence that could not be disputed in any way. Another peculiarity was that Nicole did not have her wedding ring on her finger, which is a requirement for her to leave the house. When the jewelry was first discovered, everyone believed that it had been stolen by a criminal. On the other hand, the ring was discovered in a box set on the dressing table of the victim's home while the search was being conducted. In addition, during the investigation of the body, specialists and criminalists discovered a specialized dental mouth guard in Nicole's mouth. This mouth guard was used by Nicole to prevent bruxism, which is the grinding of her teeth while she was sleeping. This device had been provided to Nicole not long before the catastrophe occurred because she was having uncontrollable spasms of her masticatory muscles as a result of her anxiousness. These spasms, in turn, led to the loss of enamel and chipping of her teeth. Following the discovery of this evidence, the investigation came to the conclusion that the victim had been murdered in her own bed while she was still asleep. This provided an explanation for the fact that she was not wearing any clothing and that her body was entirely clean and showed no signs of evidence of resistance. In addition, there was no trace of makeup on Nicole's face, which she typically applied with great care before leaving the house. By the way, David might be able to forget about the mouth guard because his wife started using it not too long ago. The position of the driver's seat in the vehicle that was discovered was also thoroughly investigated by specialists who discovered that the anthropometric data of the person who had been sitting behind the wheel at the time of the murder agreed with the data of the spouse of the individual who had been murdered. To add insult to injury, fingerprints belonging to only David and Nicole were discovered inside the vehicle, as was previously indicated. In the event that a third individual had been there in the cabin, his traces would have been discovered, and if he had wiped them, then he would have removed traces and prints of the individuals who owned the car. Another major discovery was also made possible by the rapid development of technology. The criminal tried to throw off the investigation into a tailspin by using the victim's phone in different parts of the city after the crime had been committed. Nonetheless, on both instances, a signal emanating from David's phone was simultaneous and located in the same areas. An apparent perfect family had been harboring a long simmering crisis for quite some time, and it turned out that David was also driven by something. While Nicole was devoting herself to her studies, juggling 2 jobs, and helping others overcome addiction, her husband was neglecting his physical fitness. He liked to spend his time drinking and clubbing, and he rarely lasted at one job for very long. He would waste his wife's money on booze and other women. Extreme financial hardships were thrust upon the family and grew worse with the passage of time. Nicole tried to persuade her husband to quit drinking and start attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings so he might receive help for his addiction. David laughed all the way through his response, in which he characterized his wife as being overly convoluted and uninteresting. It came to light that David had been having an affair with a number of different women and had tried multiple times to get his wife to join him in his infidelity. Nicole consistently responded with an emphatic no, and her husband even went so far as to try to intoxicate her into doing it one time. After learning about all the horrible things happening in her daughter's family, Gail tried to convince her to leave her husband. However, she was apprehensive about doing it because she had developed strong feelings for David and hoped he would change. In the wake of Nicole's mysterious death, her husband wasted little time getting a large payout from her insurance and started seeing someone else. A few months prior to the sad event, it was discovered that David, who had a history of infidelity, had been involved in an affair with a girl named Jane. He frequently joined his wife in nightclubs and pubs when she was at work or school. Just before Nicole's birthday, he took his mistress home in a flash, only to have them caught. By Nicole's surprise return, This issue was the initial spark that ignited the family confrontation. Although Nicole and her mother had a close bond, Nicole told her mother about the event. Nonetheless, her mother disappeared under mysterious circumstances a few days later. From the start, Gail had reservations about her son-in-law because she knew everything that was happening. Authorities maintained, however, that the collected evidence was inadequate to justify the suspect's detention. Following that point, the family was no longer informed about the investigation since it was deemed confidential. After waiting for a while, the parents finally gave up hope that the criminal would face consequences. I might add, as an aside, that after his wife passed away, David received a large insurance claim, which he promptly spent on Jane. Although Gail hinted that David's lover could have been an accessory or even a criminal plotter, the investigation only uncovered evidence of her involvement as a witness, hence she was only called in as a witness. Despite his persistent denial of responsibility for the disaster, David did appear in court in September 2013. At first, his lawyers claimed that there was insufficient evidence to prove their client's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, because it was purely circumstantial. The defense quickly adjusted their approach to try to frame David as a victim once they realized there were too many variables that could be utilized to implicate David. In addition to bringing up the fact that Nicole took painkillers following her back injury, the lawyers tried to convince the judge that Nicole's husband's life became unbearable due to her outbursts of anger and return to alcohol consumption. But the claims had no basis, and everyone who knew Nicole could attest to it. Second, David had no right to kill his wife in such a horrific way, regardless of whether she had lost her anger. After a subsequent finding of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, the defendant was sentenced to the maximum time permissible by the rules of the state where the case was tried. Although David will not be eligible for release until 2025, he will have served 2/3 of his 18-year prison term by then. Thank you for tuning in, gentlemen. Jason was there to support you. In the future, you will see a lot more scary stuff on the channel if you subscribe.